Hello, and thank you for joining us. This is No Soundbites Allowed, and I am your host, Michael Voss, Dragon of the Southern Tier. I'm happy to be here with you today as we are going to be discussing Joe Biden's first speech to a joint session of Congress, in effect, the State of the Union for 2021. Now, is there new information? Do we have a new outlook for the nation? Is there unity that we should be expecting? Was there anything forward-looking in the message that we heard from Joe Biden tonight? We're going to address all of that for you and all of our reactions to the comments in just a moment. But first, if this is the first time that you are seeing our program, we want to welcome you and thank you for joining us. We do long-form political commentary on this channel. And every Sunday at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, we do a live stream on YouTube, Twitter, DLive, YouTube, and all social media that the internet overlords will allow so that you have free speech to share your thoughts in chat, in comments, and tweets, and also calling into the program every Sunday at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, letting us know what you think about what's going on in the world and celebrating your free speech. We hope that you will join us Sunday at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So, what do we think about Joe Biden? What do we think about the speech that was given today? Now, one of the first things that we can say is it appears that when Joe Biden will speak to the American people, we are going to be limited to roughly an hour at a time between his first his first press conference and now looking at his speech to Congress. It seems that Joe Biden does not have the stamina to have an extended conversation with the American people. So going forward, we should be aware that he only has about enough steam to make it through an hour. That's not a lot of time sometimes. That being said, what about what Joe Biden addressed? Was there new information? Was there information that we had not heard of before? Something that would be uplifting to American people? And quite honestly, the answer is not really. If you've been following this channel for some time, you'll see that back in January 21st, we had started talking about Biden's first day and the executive orders he had put in place at that time. We also addressed his move into the Middle East to increase the number of troops in Syria, as you can see here. And we've talked about the southern border. We've talked about following the science and talking about COVID. We've addressed when Joe Biden has brought up issues about the Capitol fence and the $200 million that has been spent on that to date. We have gone over his views on gun control, his racist statements in a town hall meeting just 2 months ago, going over his thoughts on Russia and his lack of thoughts on China, his infrastructure deal that he has put out, his gun control, his many gun control and many executive orders that he has put in place within actually the first 100 days, more than any president ever recorded in history. And we've talked about his race relations to this date. So in effect, we've covered just about everything that Joe Biden has been talking about. In fact, we've gone over pretty much everything that we just mentioned was in Joe Biden's speech tonight. He literally covered no real new ground. He reiterated some of the main talking points, the bullet points, from all of the issues that we've just discussed that have happened over the last 100 days. And he very conspicuously also avoided speaking about almost anything else. Now, you can, of course, always go to C-SPAN, as we were watching it on C-SPAN, to listen to the president's speech and to hear what he actually said. And while the entire event as covered by C-SPAN is an hour and 45 minutes, the president's actual words were 64 minutes, not an hour and 45. That being said, some of the most interesting things may come out of what was said in Twitter and some of the things that were said as fact checks on Joe Biden. Let's look at the fact checks first. Now, looking at the fact checks we see, and this is KHOU channel 11, and one of the first things you'll notice is there aren't a whole lot of fact checking questions. We see that they were asking about the claim that the economy has gained back 1.3 million jobs. We see that there was a question about the number of individuals who died from COVID since Biden had taken over, the Biden administration took over. We see that there are questions about, again, COVID in the last 100 days. We see that there are questions about whether or not this was a State of the Union speech, which it is not. There is a question about whether or not, or rather, there was a question, which is not really a claim, that women, 2/3 of the women on the stage, or 2/3 of the individuals on the stage with Joe Biden were women, and that this was a first in history. Not really groundbreaking. Again, this isn't groundbreaking information. This is information that most Americans care about. It doesn't really affect anyone in the sense that, while yes, it is good to hear that there have been improvements in COVID and the individuals who are affected by COVID, that fact checking doesn't really give anyone any details. It doesn't explain jobs going forward, the infrastructure deal offered by Joe Biden, the executive orders that he's put in place, and many of the things that he has done. It's quite lacking. So maybe it's just the source that we use, because perhaps if we go to CNN and look at their fact checking, that we'll be able to look and see at what was being said. So looking at this, and we're going to go to the most up-to-date comments about fact checking, as you can see here, and we're looking at this live, and I want to make sure we get the most up-to-date. So some of the key lines from the address: getting COVID-19 vaccines administered, something that was already happening prior to the Biden administration, something that was going to have millions of shots out. Really, no new news there, no real change. COVID continues to be one of the biggest concerns in America. Businesses continue to be shut down or limited in the hours that they can have. American people have been pressed with the idea of vaccine passports, and they are, well, America's not recovered yet. It's an issue that is still ongoing, although it has been improving. But then again, it has been improving since since last April, honestly. He had some comments on police violence, which we will address in a moment, and gun violence, which is almost the same thing, but not quite. Taxing the rich, that we've heard, and it's been stated several times from the campaign trail, that Joe Biden will be taxing the rich, although his definition of the rich is very shaky and keeps changing. Bipartisanship over his sweeping infrastructure plan, which is not bipartisan at all. And getting Americans back to work, which would again go to the infrastructure deal, and not really. Troops in Afghanistan being sent home is probably the most up-to-date item in the speech. And that's kind of questionable that we would actually give an exact date and time that American troops would be leaving. That's not necessarily beneficial to our allies, but definitely beneficial to our enemies. His comments that trickle-down economics does not work. Tax and spend policies seem to be what he believes works better, and that the American people were not responsible for the growth of the middle class. Yes, it was not your jobs. It was actually unions that did it, because the government supported unions and unions built the jobs. It's insane. 71% of people who watched Biden's speech say it left them feeling optimistic. Well, it all depends on who you asked, because many people were not. In fact, most people were bored. But again, we're looking for what are the fact checks? Where are the fact checks? Well, here they are. Biden's claim about women leaving the workforce. Biden said that 2 million people dropped out of the American workforce, and that number is probably incorrect. Then again, there were over 10 million people, 10 million Americans that left the workforce because COVID either ended their jobs or removed the ability of individuals to be able to go to work. So, yeah, that's probably true. How Democrats, again, reactions, but where's the fact check? Biden's claim on seniors getting vaccinated. Well, people were getting vaccinated before Biden took over on January 20th, and that was at the beginning of the effort to get Americans vaccinated. The vaccine had been made available to Americans in about a month. So obviously that has increased. No real question there. Where is the fact check? Okay, Biden on his work on root causes of migration. Well, here's something that's interesting. You mean that Joe Biden had talked about the southern crisis, the southern border crisis. And in particular, we want to say immigration. He tackled that issue. No, he really didn't. He avoided it. He didn't want to address the fact that he had invited millions of illegal aliens from other countries to enter the United States by opening the border and removing the border wall, which he has now reversed position on to now put back in place. He didn't address the well over 16,000 children who have suffered child abuse by being sent on 1,000-mile treks by themselves to the United States. He didn't address that. He didn't address the 315,000 individuals who have come to the American border to become part of America because Biden is in charge, because his policies will keep them in America and allow them to become American citizens, in their opinion. He didn't address that. He really didn't address that, rather saying that he would do what he was doing under the Obama administration, trying to buy off the governments of the countries that people are leaving, which didn't work under the Obama administration and aren't working now. And in fact, looking at the CNN fact check, they leave that as unclear. But if you notice, there aren't a whole lot of fact checks. There's a lot of support for Joe Biden, but not a lot of comments, not a lot of fact checking about what Joe Biden actually said. And it seems the news media really wasn't interested. And you would have to wonder to yourself, but was there anything really to question? Were there any real issues that came from the Biden administration that we should be knowing about, things that we should be asking about? And in fact, the answer is quite a bit. Some of the things that we noted from this, and if you were following us on Twitter, you may have seen our text about this as we were going. Starting off with the first thing, if Biden calls the Capitol riots worst attack on democracy, what are autonomous zones? Areas right now where Americans are hostages, laws are ignored, threats of violence is the rule, people have died, destruction is rampant, and socialism is the goal. How is that not worse? In fact, we have to ask that question very strongly. Let's say that again. Autonomous zones are not only threats to democracy, they are antithetical to democracy. Their existence and their purpose is to destroy democracy. And we have to ask, if that is something which has been ongoing, as an example, in Minneapolis, the George Floyd Square Autonomous Zone has existed for almost an entire year at this point. We have seen the single longest continuous rioting in the world, I believe, in Portland. We have continuous riots in Seattle and in Dallas and Austin, New York City, and autonomous zones that have been attempted in Atlanta and across the country. What about these threats, these by definition insurrectionist actions? Are they not threats? Perhaps not, since they happen to be Democrats who are doing it. These are the progressive Democrats that are in charge of these areas, and apparently Joe Biden doesn't see things that Democrats do. He doesn't see insurrection in progressive Democrats, the Democratic Socialists of America and BLM and Antifa, when they destroy communities. That doesn't hit his radar. But January 6th did. We also went on to note, Joe Biden says, does anyone think that, or we went on to say that, does anyone think Biden's speech will even touch on the increased troops in Syria, or that Kerry betrayed America to Iran? Well, that's something we brought up actually immediately. And we were one of the first news media organizations to address the fact that there were, in fact, as you can see right here, 3 months ago, one of the first talking about the Biden Middle East policy and entering Syria. But in fact, Joe Biden didn't really address the Middle East at all. He avoided talking about what's going on with Iran, the Iran nuclear deal, with John Kerry, who has been identified as someone who has betrayed the United States and its allies in favor of Iran. That was unspoken and unaddressed by the Biden administration. Now, when it came to talking about gun control, and Joe Biden did talk a little bit about gun control and encouraged Congress to look at the ghost gun issue, an issue that is some 300 guns big. It's such a non-existent issue, the FBI doesn't even have a classification for all the ghost guns that they recover. It's a non-event in American crime and politics. But that was his focus, which will save almost no lives, quite honestly, and does not address mass shootings, school shootings, or the increase in violent crimes in the United States and cities across the entire nation, from New York City to Washington, D.C., from Baltimore to Detroit to Chicago to L.A. and Seattle and Kenosha and everywhere in between. So when Joe Biden decided he wanted to talk about gun control, did he mention the background checks and how he has found a way to stop individuals from doing what his son, Hunter Biden, had actually done, which is lie on his background check, a background check that did not identify him as a prior drug addict and someone who had been arrested by police, that he was not identified as someone who was unable to receive a firearm and yet got one anyway. Nor did Biden announce that his son is now suffering the consequences, the legal ramifications of his lie on these federal documents. No, he didn't go into that at all. So he really didn't talk about gun control so much as control of the public, control of you. In fact, he went on to say at one point that it wasn't the American people who built businesses, who built up the middle class. It was unions, the people who support the Democratic Party. Unions built the middle class. They built the businesses. They built the engine of growth of this nation, which is small businesses, which provide 70% of all the jobs in the nation. Yes, that's who we should be thanking. Unions, not the 8+ million individuals in America right now in small businesses, mom and pop businesses that employ 70% of the population, that are the engine of growth of this nation. And without them, well, there is no growth. No, he wants to thank unions. And in fact, his infrastructure plan will encourage you to join a union, not a small business, not to create a small business, but to become a member of a union. Because unions, who historically donate exclusively to Democrats, is his priority, which would seem to be somewhat self-serving. So we have to wonder. And I know Thomas Massey brought up a wonderful point, Representative Thomas Massey, saying that Joe Biden, by not wearing a mask, should incur a $500 fine because he wasn't wearing a mask at the podium. But that seems to be something that doesn't apply because the rules for Democrats do not apply to them. They don't apply to Republicans. Excuse me. They don't apply to Democrats. They only apply to Republicans. It's a little backhanded, duplicitous. So what are some of the other comments that we can look at and some of the things that we were bringing questions up? Joe Biden at one point mentioned that he was responsible for lowering drug costs and will be responsible for lowering drug costs going forward. And yet he ignores his day one executive orders where the White House under Biden decided to increase the cost of EpiPens and to maintain them at $600 for the EpiPens rather than reducing the cost down to $50. So he, in fact, increased the cost of drugs because of his executive orders, not decreasing it. And that's something that we are concerned about. Why wasn't he fact-checked on that? Why wasn't he fact-checked on when he mentioned that we have to focus on the minimum wage and increasing it to $15 per hour, while ignoring the fact that the CBO on multiple occasions now has identified that by doing this, 3.7 million people, roughly double the number of Americans who actually receive a minimum wage, will lose their jobs and become unemployed. But he doesn't want to tell the American people that. That's not important. We just need to increase the minimum wage and increase the cost of every good that Americans buy, while also creating more people unemployed than previously. And there are a lot of things we can go over here, but let's try and sum this up. Was there anything that we learned that we hadn't known previously? No. Was there any expression of outlook for the future, that America will be better because of the Biden ideology? No. No. If you weren't already on the bandwagon of the progressive ideology, then you have no reason to believe that things are going to improve. If you disagree with the progressive ideology, the socialist outlook for America, then you have nothing forward to look to. When we looked at what Joe Biden was saying, did he lie to the American people several times? Did he repeat lies that have been proven to be false, like saying that the Second Amendment always restricted Americans from being able to buy various or own various types of firearms? That is a blatant lie. Americans have been able to own cannons. They have been able to own machine guns. Yes, machine guns did exist in that time. Yes, multiple firearms that fired multiple rounds in rapid succession did exist at that time. Cannons did exist at that time, and private citizens did own them. Joe Biden is lying to the American people to say that that wasn't possible and that did not exist. History tells us he is wrong. So we hear over and over again these examples of misstatements. We've seen examples of him actually doing the opposite of what he is telling the American people is actually happening. And we hear him attacking Russia again, even though when confronted by Vladimir Putin, Joe Biden backed down, as we've covered previously. When Russia was making encroaching on the Ukraine with 81,000 troops, Joe Biden was about to send in destroyers until Vladimir Putin said, send them away. And then he did. We saw that China publicly denounced and slapped America in the face, saying that America was weak and did not have control of its own nation. publicly. The Biden administration has never addressed that. The Biden administration has still not addressed the genocide of the Uyghurs in China to this day. Nor has he commented on the arrest of 47 members of the Hong Kong City Council that has happened under the Chinese, silencing free speech. Where are his comments? Where is his support of human rights? Quite honestly, this was a very boring event. At one point, Ted Cruz went to sleep. I'm not surprised. It was a struggle for most people not to fall asleep because everything that was said has already been said. Everything that was lied about was continued to be lied about. Facts that exist were ignored, and the news media, for their part, have done an excellent job of avoiding all the critical issues and the critical questions. They're not challenging Joe Biden on what John Kerry did or did not do, and how that impacts Iran and the Middle East policy of the United States. That wasn't addressed. They haven't addressed whether or not the lies that Joe Biden has said on the Second Amendment will have an impact on the executive orders he has promised to put forward, and also the laws that he's asking Congress to put forth to restrict the Second Amendment. We have not heard the news media address and tackle the fact that Joe Biden has now authorized or sought to authorize $6 trillion in debt. $6 trillion. $2 trillion more than what is normal in any given year for the operation of the nation, and almost double the amount that is actually brought in taxes by the United States each year. And he's not done spending yet. We've heard about tax and spend Democrats before. We're about to see it on acid. What did Biden's speech tell us today? We are in for a rocky road. Democrats are more than happy to go forward and to silence the American people. That they are willing to silence the American people, that they are willing to do whatever it takes to maintain power and to move America closer and closer to a socialist nation. The outlook is bleak, just like the speech. It was boring, it was uninspiring, and it seemed to have almost no end in sight. But one good thing to keep in mind, it's most likely that Joe Biden may only have one more of these of the State of Union addresses in him before he gives up his position, and then we get to hear Kamala Harris give it her shot. I don't know if that's something to look forward to or to be afraid of. But if you believe that we've misunderstood, if our reaction is inappropriate, that we have miscontextualized anything that was said by Joe Biden in his speech, either now or over the last 100 days, as that's exactly what was in his speech, then we look forward to your comments. Please let us know. And if you found this to be interesting, informative, like and share. Most of all, please do subscribe to help expand this expression of free speech. And we look forward to seeing you every Sunday at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Thank you.